And now please welcome to the stage the Executive Director of the Immigration Partnership and Coalition Fund, Ms. Wendy Adelson. And joining her on stage, the District Director and Deputy Chief of Staff of Congressman Carlos Curbelo, Mr. Chris Miles.
Thank you, George. I am so proud to be here tonight. As George mentioned, my name is Wendy Adelson, and I lead the Impact Fund, which is a coalition of business and civic leaders founded last year by Mike Fernandez, who's a prominent businessman in our town with a very big heart and a lot of feeling for this issue of immigration. We are united in seeking sensible and humane immigration reform. Our work is bipartisan and solution-focused. And through our work together, I got the chance to meet Chris Miles, the lovely and talented Chris Miles.
I'm the lovely and talented Chris Miles. And I work as the Congressman's District Director, running his offices here in Florida. And I get to work every day in a bipartisan manner on issues like immigration, climate change, and really just working to try to change the tone in politics. And I've been able to do some great stuff with Wendy, and I'm very excited to be here.
So full disclosure, my parents are Democrats. Some of my best friends are Democrats. I actually didn't meet my first Republican until I went to law school. But now party affiliation feels far less important to me than the values that we share across party lines. Chris and I are both actively involved in the pursuit of a legislative solution for DACA, for deferred action for childhood arrivals, for young people, sometimes babies brought to this country, who've grown up here, growing up as American, and thought this country was their home and their present and their future. In my role with Impact, our partners in passing legislation are the reasonable middle, like Chris and his team, whether they're Republicans or Democrats, not the loud and often extreme voices at the margins of either party. This is a time when we need thoughtful dialogue. We need a willingness to listen and to compromise for the greater good, like the Dreamers. Dogged adherence to a party line is not going to move us forward as a community, a country, or a society.
For me, growing up in Miami with Cuban grandparents, you know, when I met my first Republican, it was when I was born. But another thing that surrounded my childhood, being the grandson of exiles, was this idea that politics and government were extremely important. That and education were the two most important things. And it was something that was very central to my childhood, whether we were at coffee window or La Ventanita at Versailles or La Canarias later on when we moved out west, like most Cuban families did. This one theme of democracy being so important was just always reiterated. And part of what I was taught was that the United States was different because unlike other countries, we didn't submit to authoritarian strongmen. We believed in our institutions, the separation of powers, the idea of every vote counts, equality, fairness. And through the last election cycle, a lot of that got rattled, whether it was some of the clips we saw up there, the fake news, you know, the media being discredited, institutions that had been so central to my upbringing being challenged by both parties. And it was really kind of a scary thought. But however, working with Wendy, on this issue, which is so important, DACA, I have a renewed sense, you know, in the shadow of this very divisive election, I have a new sense of optimism, which comes from what her fund does and what so many other leaders and most of us here believe in that these young children deserve an opportunity to stay in this country because they are Americans. And recognizing that has helped inspire me and kind of refresh me a little bit. So that video was scary, but I do think we have a good path forward.
Our friends and colleagues tonight presented many different perspectives on the life they have lived here in Miami and in other parts of the United States, on their values and their hopes for the future of our community and for our country. They talked about what it means to be American, to embrace the rule of law, the freedom of the press, the freedom to dissent, economic opportunity and social mobility, and respectful debate and compromise. There is some disagreement amongst the speakers about how threatened those values are in our current discourse.
But there's no disagreement that these are America's values. The conversation finds common elements in this very diverse backgrounds and histories of these individuals, including values that are passed down by our parents, grandparents, and other family experiences. Moments of discovery about difference, injustice, decisions made to direct one's life and work toward building of community, appreciation of the freedoms offered in the United States, and a feeling of responsibility to use those freedoms in a constructive way.
We are facing real challenges as a city and as a community. Tonight we have come together to acknowledge that this is not an easy moment. There are no simple fixes. But instead, this is a time to reach across lines of difference, whether they be political, racial, religious, gender-based, or otherwise, and embrace our commonalities, to search for what unites us instead of what divides.
The strength of our democracy is in this room. No elected leader, political party, cable news show, or interest group can undermine the will of our people and the institutions that make up our democracy. It's time to turn down the noise of partisanship and identity politics and turn to the principles that unite us all. Democracy lives in us.